All right, let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. So, Sabbath, I'm pretty excited about this. Tell me about our guest today.
I'm so excited to. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Tom Nelson. Tom is the author of Work Matters, Connecting Sunday Worship to Monday Work, and The Economics of Neighborly Love. Tom is also the senior pastor of Christ Community Church in Kansas City and has his doctorate from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. So we have two doctors in the house
It's a
today.
paradox. It's a paradox.
It's a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tom and his wife
Sorry.
live in Leawood, Kansas. They have two grown children. And also to the good stuff, Nelson and a team of church, business, and private sector partners launched Made to Flourish in order to empower a growing network of pastors to better engage, equip, and encourage each other as they integrate, we love that word, a more robust theology of faith, work, and economics into their churches. So they're closing the gap between Sunday and Monday. And that is why Made to Flourish exists. And we're excited for this wild conversation. Tom, thank you for being with us today. We are going to play, and we didn't tell you this ahead of time, but we're going to play a quick round of wild cards. So what we have is this deck of wild cards that we use with organizations, teams all across the country. There's 50 of them, but instead of, having to choose from 50, I'm just going to let you choose a number between 1 and 10. I pulled 10, and don't overthink it. Just give your quick gut response, but first choose a number between 1 and 10.
Since I'm an optimist, I'm going to go 8.
All right. Okay, here is card number 8. How would your perspective be different if you believed others could change?
How would my perspective, first of all, it's good to be with everybody. So how would my perspective be different if I believe they could change? I think it would be different that I would sense a hope rather than discouragement in my conversation with people. I would have a hopeful, I call it hopeful realism. Because sometimes it's discouraging, right? In our own lives and other people, change seems so slow and so difficult. So I think I'd have more hopeful realism that yes, I'm going to be at it because people can change and I can change. So it's pretty hopeful.
So good.
Well said.
Thank you, Tom. And okay, Rob, you pick a number for me.
3.
Okay. I'm going to pick card 3. What would change if you understood your unique strengths, skills, and competencies? What would change if I understood my unique strengths, skills, and competencies? I would have more courage. I think I would have more courage to step to the edge and be bold about these things that I can honestly say that I'm good at. That's something I'm learning about. Being honest about the things I'm good at and the things I still need to grow in.
That's good.
All right, Rob,
9.
pick a number. Okay.
9.
Okay. What are you taking personally today that likely has nothing to do with you?
Oh my goodness. Having helped author these cards and then I get these cards and I'm like, really? What am I take personally? Like how transparent do I be? Um I'm going to speak generally. I think I do take things way too personally and I have to remind myself that 90% of the things that other people are experiencing have nothing to do with me. So, I think there honestly today is probably a long list. I can think of 3 or 4 things right now at home and at work that probably have very little to do with me that I might and it's so yeah, objectivity is a big deal for me. Trying
That's
to
good.
remain it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sabbath, thank you. I love those cards. It's
me
good.
too.
Tom, Dr. Nelson. I love it that we're having this conversation. I really do. I just
Me too.
you've lit me up in just a few short weeks of knowing each other. Will you talk to us a little bit about the Sunday to Monday part of your mission? And your tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be brief. You know,
I
I
know there's
think
a
I would
lot
say just from
in
the
that.
point, all of us, isn't it true that some of our greatest failures are our greatest opportunities for growth? I mean, I just find that it's a paradox, but it's not just our successes, it's our failures. So my failure, my background as a pastor, I've been a pastor for a long time. That was my primary, kind of calling in terms of my work world. And about 5 years into I've been doing this for 36 years, so I should know more than I do and be better at it. But about 5 years into pastoral service, I realized that I was failing massively. And it wasn't moral impropriety or financial malfeasance, but it was, and I've said this to my congregation, it was pastoral malpractice. Simply put, and I've written on this, I speak on this a lot to a lot of audiences, because most people who are not pastors never hear pastors confessing their failure. Okay, so first of all, as my first introduction, hey, I'm a failure, I'm Tom. Um, but what it was is because of an impoverished theology, imagine how we think, I had an impoverished vocational paradigm in terms of my role in the world as a pastor. And the result of, if you have an impoverished idea, right, impoverished framework, it filters out to an impoverished paradigm for what you are to be and do in the world, in your
Mhm.
role. And it impacts the mission and the culture of the organization you serve. That's true all across any leadership enterprise. Doesn't mean do pastors or nonprofits. I mean, it's just deeply
Mhm.
how we think, how we frame our role. So I confessed to my congregation that I had failed them. And out of impoverished theology, I had an impoverished pastoral paradigm. And that impoverished the work that God had called me to do and the mission we were all about. In other words, I was much more concerned about how well I did on Sunday than on how my congregants did on. I was much more, my scorecard was, very limited, very impoverished, like how great the sermon was, quote unquote, or how many people were there. And that doesn't mean that Sunday doesn't matter, but I made a massive shift that the focus of our mission would now be we're going to be a church for Monday. That the reason I'm here in a pastoral role is so that you can follow Jesus and live a flourishing life in Jesus where God has called you, paid, unpaid, wherever that calling is on Monday. So that, this is 25 years ago. And that is, my failure has extruded me into a national and other broader conversations where my writing has come from, made to flourish, is to try to rectify that.
Hmm.
Churches and pastors, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do Sunday well. Sunday is the gathered space, but it's really about the scattered church on mission. The primary place of worship, spiritual formation, common good, and impact is Monday. If I may use that metaphor, it's not Sunday. So anyway, and then when I realized that, then I was put into a national conversation. I wrote some things and realized, hey, I'm not alone. I'm beginning to realize this is a serious challenge of the church, that if your listeners are a part of a church, church does matter, but many pastors, including me for a long time, we're really missing the primary focus of equipping you. We're to be about your work, paid or unpaid on Monday, not our work.
What I listening to you, it reminds me of a very similar uh, transition in people's minds regarding the research on where leader capacity is built. And that research made it very clear. A lot of it was published in the 80s and 90s, and it gave birth to the entire on-the-job development spectrum of work, where corporations realized this very early, that the research was clear that it was something like 70 to 80% of leader capacity was being developed on the job
Oh,
and
absolutely.
not in training. So it's interesting because, and the problem was that training, to this day, it's still kind of the fundamental mechanism for how we think of developing leaders. It's one of the reasons I think there is a huge deficit in the area of training. It's why so many people come out of leadership trainings and they go like, well, that was a big waste of time, or I got to get back to work. And so it was fascinating to think about it from that perspective, because it wasn't just the Sunday to Monday, it was literally the classroom to the job. And it
Okay.
was,
Yeah,
and
it's huge.
from a
That's
very
hugely important, Rob.
yeah.
And I'm just working on this area, but I just spoke on this, but like, this is so important. We can have, and we need to have, right, a clarity of our mission, our cultural values as an organization. We need to have a clear strategy, but underlying that is a word we often don't miss that you are emphasizing. And that's, if we have a faulty pedagogy, which means the way we learn, the way we teach, the way we're transformed, then our mission and strategy is ineffective. So you look at brilliant Jesus. Jesus was brilliant about everything. And what Jesus trafficked in, yes, he had propositional knowledge. In other words, the Sermon on the Mount, there's a place for classroom, for verbalization, cognition. We'd say information gathering, right?
Yeah.
But you're talking about training as transformation. If training is going to be transformation, then the fundamental aspect, and Michael Polanyi, brilliant philosopher, spoke on this and taught on this, you have to have more tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is the knowledge that cannot be articulated in verbal form. It is only caught relationship to relationship in an apprenticeship role. So Jesus modeled this. You think about brilliant Jesus. Jesus is brilliant about everything. I don't know your listeners, but like, look to Jesus. He's unbelievable, brilliant everything. Brilliant economist, but he was a brilliant teacher, and not only in his stories and his words, but in he brought 12 people together and trained them, and even the enemy, people that hated these guys, the Jerusalem aristocracy, Acts 4, I think it's 13. Dr. Luke, who's a Gentile, summarizes this, that they recognized, post-resurrection, they recognized that these guys were uneducated, quote unquote. They weren't part of the Jerusalem elite. And that's not against education, but like they recognized what? That they'd been with Jesus. And the with Jesus is not a narrative throwaway. It's a pedagogical framework. The reason they were so transformed was not just the cognitive truths that Jesus taught them. They were with Jesus in a 3-year immersive relational experience. My point, I'm just responding because so much of our strategy, training, development is so propositional intensive, and there's a place for that. But it is not the pedagogy of relational mentoring and mentoring of rich tacit knowledge. And so much of our knowing and development is not verbalized. It is in relationship with someone who's a master and we're their apprentice. So Michael Polanyi, if your crew understand, he wrote the most brilliant work on this as a philosopher on tacit knowledge. But I'm just affirming what you're saying. The transformation takes place most in a relational and community with the master and apprenticeship relationship. And this is how Jesus taught his disciples. So I'm just affirming what you're saying. It's not just cognitive. Can I just say that? We have to have cognitive information, but think how important that is in an information age. We're saturated with information, but the way we really deepen is to take that information and incarnate it with a master and apprenticeship role. This is tacit, rich knowledge, and it's huge in any leadership endeavor, your listeners, any organization. How rich is your pedagogy? If you don't have a rich tacit knowledge pedagogy, I'm just telling you, encouraging you, your structures, your pathways, you will not have the kind of missional impact.
So you got to describe to people, the average person doesn't know what pedagogy is. So when you say, if you don't have a rich, what do you mean?
Pedagogy means the way we teach and the way we learn. Exactly. Pedagogy. Okay. So that's the idea of the foundation way we learn and grow and are transformed as human beings. And the tacit aspect is that transformation that is not verbalized, but is incarnated in relationship in a master of mission.
Yes. Right? So let me, I'm going to translate. Now it's like, I'm going to translate what Tom just said for some of our audience, that the big shift that's necessary, whether you are in academics, so if you're in a university context or a business context or a ministry or a parachurch or a nonprofit, the big thing about that in terms of pedagogy, and that's the design and structure of learning, is this is a simple solve that is a part of everything that WiLD Leaders does. But quite frankly, I kind of tripped into, because when I started teaching as a professor, I didn't have much competence in the world. Like I was 25 years old running a master's program, and I realized that all this research on where people actually learn and develop, that they learn on the job, and by the way, in life as well. And there was a tremendous body of research around that. The one thing that I had, because I was teaching 3-hour classes, because I always taught graduate courses, the resource I had a little bit of book knowledge, some experience. I had the experience of the students. And so the cool thing is that I just started, because it's all I had, I kind of tripped into that pedagogy that Tom's describing. So I started to build everything around, at least half the time needs to be them talking. And if you are a professor, you know how violently different this is than what it is. And I say violently because it is a collision of culture to imagine changing this. And what it means in a business context is that if you're going to do training of leaders or of teams and having teams discuss to get together, at least half of the time should be focused on what it is they're learning about themselves and each other in relation to their current business challenge.
Yeah.
Because their current business challenge is not cold and dark and not interesting. It's very interesting to them because it's what they're working on.
Right.
So but what we've experienced over and over again, and why our methodology at WiLD is so different in what Tom's describing, is that people don't do that. What they're used to professors talking at them. They're used to trainings where they roll their eyes because it's one more talking head. And so it means literally what I tell professors or trainers, or I tell a CEO, invite the person to the conversation, which literally means one of the measures of success is they talk at least half the time. And they talk about what's relevant on the job. And it is just, and it's been, and Tom, it has been, that really is a violent clash.
Yeah. So Rob, that's brilliant. And can I tell you a short story? I know we have a limited amount of time, but like I was at a gathering of remarkable leaders in South Carolina a couple of years ago. And the focus was on spiritual formation and leadership formation for the world. And sitting next to me was a world-class surgeon. Never met him before. He teaches in a teaching hospital. And there were all these conversations. And when he started to talk, it became pin drop silent. And he said, I've been training surgeons for all my life. And yes, there's an important place of content transfer through medical school. He said, what makes the biggest difference? And this is the metaphor I want to leave with, share with you and your listeners. It's a brilliant metaphor. That's how we're transformed. He said, the most important transformation is the scrub sink. Now you think about the scrub sink.
Beautiful.
Here's what they do, right? You have residents, you have fellows, they're all learning at different stages. The seasoned surgeon, they all scrub up at the scrub sink before surgery. They talk about the surgery, what they might anticipate. They do surgery together, and then they go back and scrub down and talk more about what they experienced. Then they go have a beer together and talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's the picture of the kind of relational, tacit, dialogical, as you're talking about, not monological, transformation that really transforms culture, a culture of organization and leadership development. So I thought that was that scrub sink metaphor. And I just spoke in Dallas this last week about this, a bunch of people, like, where are the scrub sink pathways that you have to develop and nurture, where that relational transformation between those, right, that have more. I mean, we all learn from everybody. I mean, the seasoned surgeon also can learn from a resident, but it's that scrub sink pedagogy in leadership development that is so lacking in an information saturated world. And Jesus models this. And again, it ties to some other things, but I just want to show that scrub sink. There's one thing, we think in metaphors and stories, right?
Yeah.
And that scrub sink is exactly the kind of, if you want to say pedagogy or pathways or dialogical, relational, concentrated, communal transformation that's needed in all of our organizations. But it is intentional. How do we create those scrub sink realities?
Yeah. So one other thing, Tom, and this is and Sab, if you just jump in. I know when Tom and I get going, it's a train.
Well, I might know where you're going, but I do want to jump in because I heard a story that you told me when you first met Tom in the hallway, and you talked about his connection, connecting Sunday to Monday, and you talked about one of your favorite quotes that fits so perfectly into what I hear both of you saying from Adam Herschel, who said the principle to be kept in mind is to know what we see rather than to see what we know, which I imagine is what's happening at that scrub sink.
Yes.
They're having a conversation.
Yes.
And so Tom,
Brilliant.
let me tell you why that lit me up. And Sabbath, thank you. It's directly related to what we just described. And by the way, this is a book that was published a few years ago called Experience Driven Leader Development. And I wrote a couple chapters in here. So they took all these people who were different experts in on the job development and said, let's write a bunch of different things on this topic, but almost from the other angle. It's like coming from the and one of the pieces of that related to that quote that I wanted to just break down with you and what you said to me in the hall, because I didn't know it was Abraham Herschel who said that. But was that one of the amazing things that I realized over the years in working with people inside businesses, because oftentimes I almost think of it like the transition back from Monday to Sunday is just as awkward, because sometimes people feel a little more safety in talking about quotas and sales goals and operational systems than they do talking about issues of the heart.
Right.
And then sometimes even in corporations, we talk about the issues of the heart, but we don't connect the heart to that operational reality.
Right.
And so an example of this is like I came up not through being a pastor, but working on things like competency. And one of the cool things about what I've experienced through our work at WiLD Leaders is that when someone assesses their competence, there is always a deeper story of the heart, of motivation, of fear, of courageous steps, of good role models, of bad role models. Like 2/3 of the time, or 1/3 of the time in the research, when people identified key experiences in their lives, it was role models was top of the list, but 1/3 of the time it was bad role models. So it was like, so it's a tricky thing, but what's been cool is that talking about competence has opened a gateway to humanity. It's from the human doing back to the human being. And so when you said this, it just resonated so deeply from our own perspective at WiLD Leaders, when you said that, Tom, because so much of our work has been helping, I just never heard it said that way, has been helping people know what they're actually looking at and then begin to share it with each other to develop trust and team capacity and leader capacity and so on. So just go there. I'd like to hear your
So,
thoughts.
yeah, no. Aaron Heschel is a brilliant rabbi. He wrote The Sabbath, by the way, the most classic book I've ever read on the Sabbath. So just to highlight that Sabbath, it's
Yeah.
called Sabbath. But I think from let's just take it from a servant leadership lens. And again, I'm just learning, and I'm just a beginner in so many ways. I mean, but I think it's really important that servant leaders, whoever's listening today, there has to be, first of all, an awareness of what I call the peril of superficial familiarity. And this is true in any discipline. It's very true of pastors and theologians, or I use this language often, is this peril of superficiality or familiarity. I have a short commute to one of my offices, and I've done it for many years. We've all had this experience, right? And if you ask me, I went to one of them this morning. I have two offices that I go to, and it's a 5-minute commute. It's really nice. For some of you can't relate to that, I'm sure your listeners, but it's a really short commute. But if you ask me what I saw this morning, I could tell you, well, I went over I saw the sun come up. I went over a railroad track. There was a lot more that was there that I didn't see anymore because I already thought I saw it. And I think that is so true for all of our listeners, whatever the discipline. This is why, sometimes our great strengths are our greatest weaknesses. We think we know more than we do. And here's the danger. It's not that we can't, hey, I know some things. That's good. But the danger is we lose attentiveness and curiosity and wonder. And we lose a teachable heart that we can learn from everyone or unlearn or relearn. So I'm saying that's the peril. And I think it was T.S. Eliot. I might be wrong here, but use the language: "Old men are to be explorers." Maybe you've heard that. And it's not just old men; it's young men, old men, young women. All of us are to be explorers. And I think it's that kind of posture that is so important for all the listeners, all who are leading and whatever, that they maintain a real deep curiosity and wonder and attentiveness. One of my friends and one person I think really, really highly is Kirk Thompson. He's a psychiatrist in Washington, D.C. He's writing really important stuff about interpersonal neurobiology. But one thing Kirk constantly says is that you have to pay attention to what you're paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember, Simone Weil, a wonderful French writer, says, love is focused attention. I simply want to say, the more I walk with God, the more I grow, the more I learn, the more I unlearn, I realize how attention is so vital, to be focused on it with curiosity, attentiveness, and wonder and reflection, right? Because in a distracted world with oversaturated information, we can lose that. We can get numb. So I simply want to say Heschel's timeless words really call me out, because it's very easy for me to see what I already think I know and not know what I really see. So may God give us fresh eyes, both about the culture, about the world, about our organizations. We constantly need that.
And one of the there's so much importance in that. It's one of the pieces that we've discovered, Tom, in our work with leaders and teams on Monday is that to do that work, you can get there because it also requires a level of vulnerability,
Yes.
of a willingness, but we don't start with vulnerability, like vulnerability being the openness to being hurt by definition. So it's like, it's like someone may hurt me with what I discover and see and know. And so what it is that we have focused our attention on is giving people a process and an architecture for a common language so that people actually can have some understanding of like, so instead of me looking at an employee and saying like, obviously they're not motivated, like what's going, no, they're not listening to me, that I might be able to see more deeply why.
Yeah.
I could understand that there's, because I'm not talking to them through their own motivational lens. They don't even hear me because I'm speaking at them the way that I would see it, or that they feel reluctant because they don't feel confident, even though what I may experience on the surface is feels like resistance. It might be reluctance because they're like, I don't know if I have the skill to do what you're asking me to do. And so giving people the ability to see, to actually understand and discern what it is that's literally what's more truthfully going on, and to share that with each other is where we have seen the big outcome being built of trust. That if I'm not, and it's like taking the depth of what you're describing and attempting to put that into practice is what the focus of WiLD Leaders has been about.
So can I hitchhike on your wisdom of just a little bit for a moment? Because I think the language of seeing is also really important in seeing. So I didn't mention Dan Siegel, mentioned Kurt Thompson. Some of the people are working deeply in terms of interpersonal neurobiology and how our brains function. One of the foundational realities we know with pretty strong research is that all of us need 4 S's in relationship: to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure. Notice number 1, we all need to be seen. So I'm playing with that word see and seem, and you're talking about an employee or other leaders. All of us need to be seen and felt seen. And so I'm just affirming what you're saying is that often we don't really pay attention and really see others, and all of us need to be seen. And I just want to highlight that from sort of mental health and neurobiology's lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of us need to be seen and safe and secure in a relationship. And soothe means empathy, that we feel being felt, that people get us. And that requires
there's an incredible
curiosity, attentiveness, and listening and love.
One of the most powerful variables from the research, primarily from the 90s, people started to stop studying it because it was such a powerful variable. You plug this into any study of organizational or personal effectiveness, was social support. So it's all related to that seeing ideas. If I had it, everything was better. All the outcomes I was looking for were better. If I didn't, they were worse. And then people started to study specific relationships of support, like mentoring and role models and so on. People that have your back, people whose shoulders you'd cry on. They're all people who saw you more effectively. Powerful stuff. Other thing, Tom, I think for another conversation, it would be powerful to break down is the layers of knowing what you see. And so I was thinking about the individual level, the team level, organizational level, and then there's also, am I seeing the context effectively? Is like what is actually, so the sun is rising, what's going on around that that's occurring, that's causing it to look a certain way. So Tom, this is amazing. Just an incredible conversation. As we wrap this up, Sab.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's quite clear that we need to have another conversation. We're just touching the surface, really. So looking forward to when we can have another conversation together, Tom. We want the listeners to know, how can they connect with you? Tell them where to find you and the best way to connect with your work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I serve a remarkable organization called Made to Flourish. I'm also a pastor, so I have 2 roles. But like, if they want to look at what we're doing, there's a lot of great resources across the country. It's called madetoflourish.org. They can go on our website. There's all kinds of resources. I've written several books. I have another one coming out. So that's probably the best way. And they can just reach me at Tom N at madetoflourish.org, Tom N at madetoflourish.org if they want.
Perfect.
But yeah, we're here to contribute, and it's a blessed life God's given me. I'm so grateful for that. Grateful for being on your podcast. And Sabbath, what a delight to meet you and your warm smile. And Rob, I hope we can spend more time together. I just find you not only a dear friend, but a thought partner. And it's a gift. This is a gift of grace. Thank you for letting me have that today. It's a blessing in my life.
For sure. Thank you, Tom.
Absolutely.
As a final thought, if anyone is interested in understanding the WiLD Trust platform and the way that we are also connecting these dots together with like-minded leaders like Tom, then go to wildtrustplatform.com, or you can go to wildleaders.org to check out things that are going on, or reach out to us at contact@wildleaders.org. It is so good, Tom. I'm so grateful for this conversation. The layers in it are profound. And I hope that every person who is listening feels a sense of, oh my goodness, yeah, I get that. And I want more of that. And I want to understand that more, what it means to actually know what I see, to connect the things of the heart, to connect my human being to my human doing, is what I hope you feel an inspiration toward in this conversation. So Dr. Nelson, thank you. Sabbath, as always, thank you, my friend.
Thank you for listening to this WiLD Conversation podcast. Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our WiLD Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational level. Visit wildleaders.org/wild-trust-index to download a sample report and begin measuring trust. Seize your WiLD moment today.